Hello and welcome back to the Transfer Flow podcast. And on today's show, how do Arsenal survive 2 months without Bukayo Saka? Who could they target to replenish their attack? Then Dani Olmo's problems at Barcelona. Currently a free agent. Will he end up staying there for the rest of the season? Liverpool want to replace Darwin Nunez with Marcus Thuram, but does it make sense for any of the parties involved? And Nottingham Forest, can they truly dream of Champions League football? Or is it all going to go up in smoke? That's all on today's episode. So we are back for the first episode of 2025. Good to see you, Ted. How are you doing?
Happy 2025, sir. Glad to be here. It was a long, quiet time. But no, it's nice to be back. We had lots of festive football over the period of time. Lots of tired-looking games. And weirdly, like sometimes tired games mean that teams don't score. This time it felt like tired games meant lots of goals were scored by different teams. Chelsea barfed again, which we're not criticizing them about. Actually, it was just sort of expected that they wouldn't continue to be on that level. Newcastle have been roaring, and Liverpool just keep doing their thing.
Yeah, Liverpool have been highly impressive. But yeah, like you say, Brentford, Brighton are on a bad run right now. Spurs, Manchester United, a load of teams really struggling with the festive fixture list. And I wonder, I mean, just before we get into it, do you think that this is partially about the fixture congestion that we're seeing, kind of more volatility, more injured squads? It feels like results are kind of pinballing all over the place.
I think the injured squads is a thing. And I think that players are desperate for like full summers off. You're seeing also teams like tack on what used to be preseason tours. They're tacking on season tours at the end of the year now so that players can have kind of a real period of time. I think the squad management is a real thing, and teams have to be really careful about it. Some coaches are better than others. I think we're seeing an accumulation of soft tissue again. But I feel like we haven't seen as many sort of like huge ACL injuries as we had seen previously, which feels like a little bit of the balance, unlike the epidemic in the women's game. And then the other side of it is really just, I think it's just the Premier League's tough, right? And every year we go into this time of year, and it's not just the Premier League, man, the lower leagues are a fucking meat grinder down there. Like they have 46 games that they have to get through. They have really congested fixtures. They have smaller squads, less money. And sometimes it's just like, yeah, we had to bring up a random academy kid on loan for the next month because we had nobody else in order to play that spot. So I don't think it feels necessarily worse than it has been, but a lot of these teams are gassed. And as you'll see some of the coaches mention in their press conferences, like they just have been playing the same group because they didn't have the other players available. And then eventually that level of output or frequency of just minutes is going to accumulate some level of injury. It's almost impossible not to.
Yeah, it's a good time to have an academy player Twitter account, I think, if you want to get quoted in major papers. But
it's a good time to have a really good academy if you're someone like Arsenal or Liverpool or teams that are willing to bring through players. That's probably a good segue into what we wanted to talk about first. Although we've already talked about other things. Some guy from North London that was their most valuable player.
And is now going to sit out a couple of months with a pretty nasty injury. And I mean, look, Arsenal have been very fortunate with Saka up till now in that they've never had an extended period without him. He's gone down also in very quick succession. West Ham lost Jared Bowen. You know, that's obviously a significant loss for them too. And there are all sorts of questions here. You know, whenever a player like this gets injured, then half the fans kind of say, well, we should have had a top quality backup ready to go. And the other half said, well, we can't be expected to have anybody there because why would anybody in the world except, you know, sitting behind him earning 100K a week or whatever it is? They used Nwaneri against Brentford last night, who was pretty good, but obviously nowhere near Saka level. So we thought it'd be interesting to talk about how Arsenal go about replacing a player of this quality, a player who, of course, we all agreed several weeks ago, and we have not changed our minds on. He is the best player in the Premier League, right? There's absolutely no evidence that would throw that into question.
We're going to bring up the tweet on screen or the blue sky skeet, as it were. Former beloved podcast co-host James Yorke said a month ago, Saka is the best player in the league, in my opinion. And we riffed on that in the podcast because it was fun to talk about. And he might have been like possibly the most valuable at the time. And then since that time, James just tweeted the other day, 7 goals, 7 assists, and 6 Premier League games for Mohamed Salah. So,
Yeah.
maybe Salah took that personally.
Well, I mean, Alexander Isak has something like 10 in his last 4 or 5, and
Ishak's
he's
been
not even the form player in the
unbelievable.
Prem.
He's been unbelievable, and so actually, we're gonna segue off of this one. So Ishak was a guy that was on the sort of rumor list this summer, and the number that came out was like 100 million. Part of that was based off of Newcastle needing PSR help, and part of it was basically like it was kind of time for him to have his next career step. Like this is a kid that was scouted very very early, like at ages 16 17 at AIK I think in Sweden, and then he did the classic young player, physically looks really good but kind of lanky and awkward, go to Germany. So he went to Dortmund, looked really good there, but then had some like tricky times, and that's why he ended up in Spain for a period of time. Spain is actually like a really good place for somebody that kind of looks different physically to get good game time, better weather there, and see if they can kind of bulk into the quality of player that the Champions League teams need. Some leagues are good at development. Some leagues are eh, they're tricky. Like Italy has a hard time developing elite players and then seeing them go to other places, and there's different arguments around that. But Ishak was the guy that everybody looked at as like, okay, he's a Champions League caliber starting forward or center forward. Where could he go, and what does his ceiling look like? And his ceiling looks like this. Like he's been outstanding. He is a handful for every type of player in the Premier League, almost no matter what quality they are, and he can score against just about everybody. He just happens to be on a Newcastle team that over the last couple of years has been poor squad management planning and is a little worse than you might expect.
Yeah, there was a period there where Dortmund, if they'd kind of had a little bit more patience, could have had Isak and Haaland, replace Haaland with Isak, or the other way around. I mean, incredible wealth of talent that then never really benefited them that much in the end.
I think they made some good numbers.
Hmm.
For those of you who don't know the Haaland story, so Haaland should have moved before the Dortmund deal. Like everybody was in for Haaland. Everybody knew who he was. He was unbelievable at Salzburg. And basically, his agent had a crystal clear plan for him and also for his agent to get paid. and that's usually the most important bit. It was that we're going to come out of here. We're going to come from Norway. We'll go to Salzburg. Salzburg are great. Red Bull in general, great at developing young talents. Also, it's like a great shop window for people to be able to see you there. Although in some cases, unless you're that super tier of Haaland's talent, like you're a little less certain how they're going to play elsewhere because like Austria is a bit soft and squishy, as we've kind of seen from the Champions League play. So then Haaland's agent said, "Well, we're not going to go directly to Manchester United. Like obviously everybody knows about him. You'll hear the Solskjaer talks about how we knew him. Obviously, we were going to bring him, but the plan was really that he would have a mid-tier move and then a top-tier move because." That way, both of them got paid extra money off of that transfer fee. And that transfer fee basically sort of came back in different types of bonuses. It's a little bit like what you saw Mbappe do, in that Mbappe went to PSG, he got paid, mountains and mountains of stuff while they're arguing about whether he's due some extra money as a quote unquote loyalty bonus. And then he got paid basically his own transfer fee in a giant signing bonus when he moved to Real Madrid. Haaland had an extra transfer effectively, partly for being able to be in a softer league to get good playing time in a development space, which is kind of what the Bundesliga is these days. And then he had one more giant one, which is sort of his capstone one. At the time, at least, it was thought to be that way, where he's gone to Manchester City and they pay among the best wages in the world as well. So it's the classic type of case where Isak should have had his move this summer, did not because nobody wanted to spend quite the amount of money that Newcastle wanted for him. He looks great right now.
Hmm.
The question is, are they good enough to make the Champions League this year? I don't know. We've got lots of questions about teams that we'll talk about in just a little bit.
Hmm.
With Saka, though, since you watch this team all the time, what do you think that they should do for the next couple months, aside from making sure that he doesn't come back for the England international break, which has been a big part of his fitness challenges as well?
Yeah, I would definitely not do that. It's difficult because I just don't know. Unwaneri he played obviously kind of like a little bit in the Odegaard role, and now he's playing in the Saka role. And I don't really know enough about him to know what you think he's going to be. What's popped in his numbers so far, and what's popped when I watch him, is he does get shots, and his ball retention is really good. Like he can dribble around basically anyone. He's not a creator, so from that point of view, he seems much more of a winger type than a 10 type. So I think it makes sense to give him minutes, and I think that's clearly a good investment in the future. You've also got Sterling, who is there and should play.
We think so anyway, but what do we know?
I think that's worth a go-to. So to me, it really comes down to, is there an option on the market that really represents good value? Because we're not in a situation where Arsenal are, say, 2 points off Liverpool at the top of the table. They're significantly behind. Saka should hopefully be back for the latter stages of the Champions League. I'm not sure there's an argument here for really pushing the boat out unless there's a great opportunity.
I wouldn't do it, and I don't think that they will do it because they know that they have bigger positions of need, and that's kind of been the argument. Also, like their value over replacement player for either Martinelli or Nwaneri, who's 17 right now, right? Like, or
Yeah.
he's 8.
Yeah.
Yeah, he'll be 18 in March. Like, get him some playing time. That's like, let him go. So I think that they'll weather the sock a bit. If they were closer, and then they would make the leap. The other thing that Arsenal do is they tend to try and sit on some extra money in case something comes up, and this has been true for over a decade. Like back in the start of 2010 era, like Monreal, Santi Cazorla, even Mesut Ozil, like they usually sat on cash waiting to look for sort of discounted deals, and I think that they still will do that. One of the things that has come up is like things like Omar Marmoush, who was a really interesting target in the summertime. It looked like Spurs almost had a deal done, and then he didn't come. And now he's completely exploded in the Bundesliga. He was very good last year too, which is why he was on the radar. The question in deals like that, though, is can you find one where the numbers add up for everybody? Because if you're buying a 25-year-old, you're getting him at his age 26 season. Like you could put him on a 5-year deal. Like you're getting him until he's 31. You're probably getting him post peak. And so do you actually want to pay, 60, 70, 80 million in some cases for a player that is highly valued by his team? His team's, in a Champions League fight, so they don't really want to let him go. Or can you find a number that makes sense for everybody where like the player's getting paid a good amount, but not a crazy amount. He's not going to stay on his 30K a week or whatever he's making. That doesn't happen. Somebody's like, oh, well, Arsenal can afford that. I'm like, yes, when you move for 50 plus million, you get a big pay rise. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but that's how that works. So the options on the market are basically like, can you find ones that fit their profile? Because they don't want to buy post peak unless it's on a discount. People have suggested Rashford, which is insane. Like again, that's like a zero money deal, right? Like the only thing that United wants to do is get Rashford's giant wages off the deal. People are floating around 25 billion in the transfer rumor space like they have before, which once again, if you have no understanding of what this looks like, then yes, you'll put that number out there. But the reality is they're just looking to salary dump, like Sancho was a salary dump, like Sterling was a salary dump. Yeah, I don't know. I think that Arsenal are kind of stuck unless things float in January that become interesting. But there's so much stuff going on in January and so many teams that kind of want to make moves or desperately need to make moves. Like City need to make a move. They just need to make about 5 moves. That the discounts and the values be hard to find unless there are teams that are like, look, we're just out. So like we'll take a good deal right now. We'll lock in the money. Players not going to get injured between now and then. We'll get out of this.
Yeah, I think there are. Whenever you see fans of teams talking about what would be a good price to get for X player, I think that's not really living in the reality of things now. Like teams like Chelsea would be better off just taking money on some of these guys rather than continuing to throw wages into the endless pit of money that they're burning every season.
The only way that changes is if they're happy to have the depreciation and they're getting either loan fees or whatever. Mm-hmm. So like there can be accounting reasons why actually, and the Abramovich era was awesome for this. So like this was early on where they had, the loan army, there were 37 players on loan, but those players were like not only getting the bulk of their wages paid, if not all of it, but they were getting anywhere between 2 and 10 million a year in transfer loans. And those loans helped sort of the amortization. It helped the money laundering, quote unquote, of making sure that the numbers added up at the end of the accounting year.
We're leaving that in, are we? Edit
Yeah.
point.
No, it was good.
No. I mean, like, yeah, they were incredibly good at doing it, and the difficulty now, of course, is that they bought so many of those assets at kind of like peak value. They bought them as if they were the finished article that they
Exactly.
can't appreciate.
I can't appreciate it either.
Yeah. Oh God above. This is what happens when you have two dads doing a podcast together. Okay, right. Well, let me throw some names at you for Arsenal then, because I agree. Like, there are some that don't make sense at all. So to me, a perfect example of a name that doesn't make sense is Bryan Mbeumo. 25 years old, lots of goals and assists in the Premier League. I think you maybe like this even less than I do.
He came up, and I think Kim and I were split on this in the summertime. So he came up in the summertime as a target for Liverpool, and I definitely did not think that he was better than the current Liverpool players that they had.
Mm-hmm.
I like him just fine. The gap here is effectively, what could Mbeumo be in a team that is better than Brentford, and potentially one that has fewer injuries? Like Brentford have been good when they've been healthy, but they just don't have the depth of talent to be able to weather the injury stuff. They lost two center backs in a game between Pinnock, who had a hamstring injury, and Vandenberg. Norgard's been nursing some injuries all season, like Janelt as well. So he's good. He's fine. And he's more like, ironically, I was like, oh yeah, he might make sense for a Nottingham Forest, which, they're pretty good this year too. I don't think he's top tier Champions League, and right now he's overperforming his expected goals by 3x. Like, he has basically 3 expected goals and 9 goals. He has no history in his performance metrics that says that he's like an elite or super elite finisher. He's basically been on the stats bomb number for the most part, with some variation around it, for like his entire career. So like, he's having a hot run, and somebody could make a mistake on that. I think Brentford would be, potentially happy to move on, because they have not sold as well in recent years as they have historically. And so that's kind of what they do, and they reinvest in other players. Yeah, I just don't see it. He's not good enough for the top tier Champions League. And even this year, like, the numbers are less good than they were before. So you'd really have to believe that he'd be able to overcome his sort of attack list bias. But like, Brentford play insane games at home, so I don't
Yeah.
even that doesn't add up for me.
But of course, that idea, yeah. What's he going to be like against sitting defenses? Like, he's not a dribbler. He's got quite a lot of expected goals assisted, but from relatively few chances created. You watch the games and you see how it happens. They get on a breakaway and he plays the killer pass or something. But yeah, he's lost pretty much a shot since last season. His expected goals are down from last season. I'd have understood this maybe more last year. He's also a very low pass completion guy. Very low pass completion guy.
That can be a high risk reward, which is sort of their style. Like, if you're playing consistently in transition and you're constantly trying to make dangerous passes, like that, it's just much harder to complete those passes. The guy that was the classic one for this, outside of maybe Lionel Messi, was Dembele. So Ousmane Dembele had sort of weirdly low pass completion numbers, but that was because he was awesome at creating like perfect chances for his teammates. And that type of risk reward passer, where he's very plus EV in the moments that count, still has a lot of value. You just have to really dig to figure that out in the metrics.
Yeah, and I just think when I'm looking at a player like this, who I imagine is going to cost kind of a bomb, I don't really want to have to dream too much or to be figuring it out.
That's the risk factor. Like, if you really have to like squint and twist your head a little bit and be like, hey, is that guy good enough for this? I'm not sure. Then that's not a number that you want to have be large. So yeah.
Exactly. Okay, well, let's go on to another couple of guys. Mathys Tel on loan, this would be, because I cannot imagine that Bayern Munich be willing to let him go on a permanent deal. He's played barely any minutes this season. He got 1,000 minutes last year in the league. He's only got 200 this season under Vincent Kompany. But he's a guy I think that we all love.
I don't think there's any real concern about his potential ability in the future. Like, his ability right now is a little unknown. Again, another age range that he's a star. Well, he's a future star. He's getting minutes in a real team at 18, 19, 20 years old. Those are all guys that like everybody knows about and flashes up on the radar. A loan makes absolutely no sense, and in fact, it's a negative because a loan would take away time from the players that you want to be able to prove that are good. Like you want to give them time inside of your own organization.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, tell there's no point really going into it, but it's also just there's not really anything behind him at Bayern Munich, or behind Kane rather at Bayern Munich. You just can't run a whole season like this. And when they get to the last stage of the Champions League, no, no, no. Another loan to buy. This is not a Saka guy, but I guess it's an attack bolsterer, which is Evan Ferguson, which I think would be a loan to buy. He was a guy who really exploded, a teenager playing centre forward in the Premier League, getting good expected goal numbers, getting shots, looking like a pretty reliable passer as well, playing for a good side. And then, the way it does often happen for youth players, steps backward, and the hope is he'll take a step forward. Arsenal, maybe they think it could be with us.
I think that this one was quite interesting. He was mentioned as a potential player for Manchester United a couple of years ago as well. I think when they got Højlund, like that was most likely. I think he's had some injury issues, and his body has like struggled a little bit in trying to figure out how to play sort of post injury. I think everybody's interested. Everybody knows who he is. Brighton sell really well. Brighton have issues as well right now, though, where like if he's not getting on the pitch, like that's problematic for them. Welbeck can't quite get back to full health, and he was on fire, and he was actually a really important part of their attack. Jorginho Rutor, who they bought in the summertime, who I was like not super convinced about. Like he doesn't offer the same sort of things in the scoring creativity that Welbeck does.
Mm-hmm.
And so their challenge is really figure out if Ferguson is one of their players for the future. If not, then get as much money as possible for him. Arsenal are kind of looking for that level of player, like where he's a little bit young. He doesn't need a ton of minutes right now, but he can have minutes. But I think that everybody's worried about his fitness and his future fitness at the moment and his performance outputs because of it. And that's true for a lot of different players as well. I mean, honestly, Gabriel Jesus went from dead and buried to all of a sudden like undroppable. And the question is just like, how long are these things sustainable? And is this something you can rely on in future years, or is he going to be up and down, in and out of the side?
Yeah, I think we all kind of loved what we saw from Ferguson at the beginning. Like the numbers back then were incredible, and his comfort on the ball, his ability to kind of hold off Premier League defenders as a teenager was pretty astonishing. This is a price situation, you just like, I like the guy. I want to be careful with my risk, but doesn't solve the Saka problem anyway. Just feels like another part to chuck in. The last one then, Leroy Sane. So he's played about 800 mins in the league, 5 goal involvements in the Bundesliga. Don't love it, to be honest. He's 29 next week. Underlying numbers are still, always incredible. His underlying numbers are always incredible. He plays in the Bundesliga for Bayern Munich, and he's good. Like, it's not that surprising. And I guess that if you were looking for somebody who was the most direct replacement for what Saka can do, he is one of those guys. You've talked about this. It's quite hard when we're talking about backing up Saka, right? In that you were talking before Christmas about how Saka can look at a game and think, what part of my skill set will be most damaging for the opponents? What do they want to see me do the least? And Sané is one of those guys who actually does have a broad enough skill set to do some of the same thing. He can carry, he can create, he can score goals. There aren't many guys who could do all three.
So Arsenal currently have some issues inside of their squad building that I think you have to be concerned about. Like one is that they're starting to pick up players that are slightly older. Like Marino was a transfer this summer that went older. They've got Trossard who's still around. They've got Zinchenko who needs to go. Like there's a variety of players that are sort of aging out of performance ability at this level. And it doesn't mean that they can't go somewhere else and be successful. Like Granit Xhaka went somewhere else and was very successful. But I think the Premier League was too intense for him. And like it was a big challenge for him. And certainly in a continued deal, it would have been a big challenge. Marino was a pickup that I like wasn't super happy about. He's fine. But like again, you need to be careful about having a bunch of older players. Sonny would be like a 3-year rental and at the best of times. And so then you're like, all right, what do his next 3 years look like? And
Hmm.
predicting that is not impossible. Like you can kind of give yourself projections, like sort of best case, worst case, median case outcomes. Um, I just don't feel like Arsenal have enough need right now, unless they
Yeah.
really wanted to add like a Champions League game changer. Like that's the
Hmm.
thing that I think that they might be interested in. Maybe they can win any of the cups because the defense is so good right now, and so because of that, maybe they make that move. But the reality is, I think that they want to set themselves up for the next sort of 2 to 4 years, and not for this year, because the league isn't really within shouting distance. Like a lot of things would have to go their way in order to make that move. So, in that respect, they're probably looking younger. If they could sell anybody like off the books, even just loan them out and let their contracts expire, like they probably would to recoup some of that. And then they're not averse to reinvesting.
Yeah, I agree. I don't really want to see their recruitment kind of tend older, because it feels like the whole point has been, well, look, if we don't win the league this season, we've got another maybe 4 years of some of these guys before they're getting like post peak. You've got Saliba, Martinelli, Saka, who are all 23-ish. It's yeah, unless I guess he could play on both sides. I'll say that for Sané. Um,
I think he's the most likely and potentially the most interesting of the ones that have been mooted. And yeah, I think that Bayern don't necessarily need him. They wanted to get rid of him in the summertime to get a real fee, and now they're like, yeah, we're fine without him. We've got, and in fact, like they have some depth and they have some young players, as we've seen, that they would like to
yeah.
get more time as well.
All right. Well, I think that's probably enough Arsenal. I'll be interested to see if they do anything. I'd be very surprised to see a Saka replacement come in. Should we move on to Barcelona? Because Barcelona have been doing some stepping on rakes. Dani Olmo, obviously, they brought in the summer at great expense and great
Incredible.
inconvenience, because they had
So
to do a
incredible.
bunch of horseshit shenanigans to try and register him. They then missed the deadline to register him for the back half of the season, which means that he is technically a free agent. They can't. They have a wage cap imposed by La Liga. They can't register him and meet that wage cap. They also can't register Pau Victor. They've appealed this decision, but as it stands, he cannot play for Barcelona. They can't loan him out because they technically don't have him registered. Um, if they were to sell someone and therefore free up the space to re-register him, it's not actually clear that that would be allowed under the federation rules, because you're not allowed to sign the same player twice in one season. So I don't know what's happening to this guy.
You, speaking of beloved podcast co-hosts, you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned our friend Ravi Ramaneni, who we think is genuinely one of the nicest people that we know, and he's very smart, but he's smart and polite, unlike we two idiots. And then the only time
Exactly.
that Ravi gets like properly salty is when he looks at Barcelona and what they do over and over again. And there's this concept of infinite levers, but I think the real concept is infinite rakes when it comes to their management of that squad. Because I mean, how could you not see this? And like, oh, we'll sell enough luxury boxes. And like, I don't think that they have anything more to sell anymore. Like it's not there. And if I were a team that was outside of Barcelona, I would just sit outside their academy and look for every good young player that I could potentially buy. And I'm like, yep, I will take him for this amount and him for this amount. In fact, give me a package deal. Like put him in a 6-pack and like I'll take him off and like we'll do like Wenger used to do with children from France. And so it, it's so impossibly stupid that you can't actually
Yeah.
believe it's reality, and yet this actually happened. The people that were reporting on this were so cautious about it because they're like, this can't be true. This is stretching the bounds of believability that this is a real thing that is going to happen. I want to cautiously report it so that we can retract it when it turns out that this was a fluke misunderstanding of the rules.
If I were Hansi Flick, I would be ripping people's fucking heads off. I would be so angry. I'd be like, do you understand the way, like the things that I've had to feed the children in the academy to get them performing at this level? Like, do you understand like how many peds
Octopus,
we've had to give them? Like
cuttlefish,
horse placenta, like everything, Wagovi, like they're just doing everything.
mate.
And now we're just in this situation where The atmosphere around the club is horrific. They've dropped off the top of the league. People are calling, rightly, for Juan Laporta's head. And Dani Olmo could feasibly leave for any of the big teams in the Premier League, or Bayern or PSG, who are reportedly all interested in the player.
Manchester City kind of needs some dudes, right?
Yeah, this feels like a City one. Like, honestly, of all the guys there, I was like, City, come on.
Here's the most insane thing to me. He was a luxury purchase.
Yeah.
They did not need him. They didn't need him.
This is when they were like, we want a left winger, so we're going to sign Czech's Notes Dani Olmo.
He's not Czech.
God. He could be. He could be.
He could be.
He's like one of the most Eastern European Spaniards that you'll ever see, but that might be because he was at Zagreb. Was he at Zagreb?
Yeah. So when he came out of there, like I was looking at it, it's a bit like realizing that Borja Sainz this past week is like, he could be a target for Athletic Bilbao. And you're like, really? A Norwich player could be a target? What?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh yeah, he grew up in the area. It was a thing where I was like, oh, I just thought that he was like some random kid that came out of Serbia or Croatia. But no, yeah, it's me. Yes, stupid beyond belief. And they overcome themselves by having La Masia at the moment and great coaches and just this pipeline of kids that are fantastic. You'd think that pipeline would have been something that they could have just worked into it and not overpaid for the last 5 years in stupid transfers over and over again.
Yeah, I think they've always kind of said, well, one day Frenkie de Jong will leave, and this will solve all our problems.
That's 6 months' time.
He's like the true original sense of the scapegoat, right? You know, where they're like, we've put all our sins on this pack animal, and we will now slap it on the rump and send it out of the city gates, and presumably everything will be fine. But I mean, you know, I'm not saying that like that wouldn't improve things in some ways. Like his wages are insane, but
if I'm Frenkie de Jong, I'm gonna fucking stay as long as I possibly can. I'm like, I am going to bleed you, and I am bitter about this because you have been horrible to me the entire time. And so I am going to be here as long as I possibly can because you have brought this upon yourselves, and I'm merely the spirit of vengeance.
But they're like doing whose contract was it? The baseball contract where a guy got like paid every year until
Shohei Ohtani? Oh, you mean the original one, Bobby Bonilla.
Yeah, where it was like, okay, we pay you every year until the last syllable of recorded time. Like, I feel like Frenkie de Jong is going to end up in that sort of situation where once a year he shows up at La Masia,
Frenkie de Jong Day,
a big sack with like a dollar sign on it, and he's like, fill this up. Because that also happened with all their players during COVID. You know, PK and all these, they said, we're going to defer these and we're going to make you a club ambassador forever, which means that we're going to pay you in like Zimbabwean dollars.
On in tapas.
Yeah, okay. Well, but you know,
I would work for different directions.
Yeah, it's weird that you haven't tried to pitch me on that so far. Like we'll pay you more jamon this year and less real money. Because it probably would work. Okay. Dani Olmo. Most of the clubs linked here don't really make sense to me. Spurs doesn't make sense to me. Liverpool, Chelsea, haha. Arsenal, no, though maybe they need creativity. United, I guess you could squint and see, like, they need somebody who can play behind the striker and do a bit of everything, I guess. But
you're trying to get me in trouble here. You're trying to get me to comment on the fact that the transfer rumors lately have said that Manchester United are available to offers for all of their players that have been clinically dead, play like they're dead, or are available so rarely that they might as well be dead. And those three are Christian Eriksen, Casemiro, and Victor Lindelof, who we literally thought had already fucked off to Turkey.
Those three?
I mean, everybody's available. Luke Shaw's hamstrings are also available. Luke Shaw, however, is going to be a club ambassador forever.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so like, to return to Dani Olmo, please don't talk about people being dead. To return to Dani Olmo,
is he dead?
He's played like a third of the minutes, so like 2/3 of the time, like, yeah, he is kind of dead. Like on average, he's dead.
If City signed him, they should do it on a paper game basis, right? Like, look, here's the deal. Like, you can have 100,000 a week in base wages, and you could have 200,000 for every game that you play. And there you go. You've solved the risk problem. Now, Olmo's agent obviously will not allow him to do that, unless, of course, the fact that like he has a contract with Barcelona that they might have to pay forever means that he's going to get double paid the whole time. So why the hell would you not do it?
Yeah, he's got a clause in his contract, right, where if he isn't registered, Like unilaterally, he has the power to just leave, just go off and get another contract. So, I mean, that's great work by his agent. Obviously, his agent just looked at Barcelona and said, "Oh my god, this is going to be incredible."
Yeah, you're like, we're not going to screw ourselves, and we're not going to allow you to actually sort of make him into another Frenkie de Jong. So, like, how are we writing this contract that says that when inevitably something goes wrong, which no, I trust you. You've got this covered. You'll be fine. I get you. But just in case, the lawyer's job is to make sure that we have fallback positions multiple different times. Yeah, I mean, I think City is the place that makes it most obvious. I don't think he fits in United right now at all. I think that United have much bigger problems. I think also like they have their own budget concerns, or they're just cruel, and that's why they've cut all the bonuses for everybody across the whole of the working people up there in Manchester.
Is there, okay, just before we leave Dani Olmo, is there anybody who it seems like I see conversations about Dani Olmo all the time, and so many people seem to be very unclear on what kind of player he is. They think he's a winger, they think he's a conventional attacking mid, they think he's a striker. He has played in all these positions, but who do you think is a kind of reasonable comp for Dani Olmo? Because everybody just seems to look at him and see, he's a Rorschach footballer.
Do you know what I think? I think he would actually fit really well in a lot of the style of play that we're seeing in Italy right now, where they sort of have like pretty reasonable 8-10s, and they'll actually build their team around players like that. You obviously have to be careful if he's not going to be there all the time. But for those teams that are looking for a very competent 8-10 that isn't going to play further back. So a lot of times what teams are looking for these days is a creative 8 that can slot into a 6, right? And like, especially when you're playing a team that you're worried about their attack, or like you're looking at an away match in the Champions League or something like that, you want somebody that's more robust defensively. That's not Olmo. Olmo is more like a central attacking midfielder that can play wide at times and has played wide very well in his career, but these days, might not have the pace. There's always the story about Giggs, and actually when Saka's injury came up, I worried about this as well, where Giggs said that he tore his hamstring at like age 23 or something like that. I don't remember the exact one. I'm not old enough as a Manchester United fan to know. But he then said that he could never run full speed ever again. He played the game at about 80 to 90% of his full speed, because if he ever ran full speed again, he was worried that his hamstring would twang and then he would be done for the rest of the season. And obviously, given Giggs' output for late in his career, like that's incredibly impressive. There are other things about Giggs that are less impressive, but that's for a different podcast. I worried about that with Saka, who always seems to be like he never runs at full speed. And I feel like he might have been managing his hamstrings for years now. And so like finally the big twang came, but maybe like getting a break is there. Olmo has a bit of that where like he used to be able to be really fast. He used to be an impressive player in these different ways, but now I think he has to manage his body and his output in order to try and keep himself healthy. And even then he's had issues with it.
But you like him for Manchester City as a potential?
I do, but I don't see anybody signing him long term, and I don't think that his agents are going to look at that. I think they're just looking for a short term loan. They want him to come back to Barcelona. He wants to come back to Barcelona, so I think that that's most likely. If that got done, I wouldn't be shocked by it, but I don't think a long term deal would be something that shocked me.
Yeah, me too. Okay, you touched on Serie A there, and how Serie A is quite kind to players sometimes who play between positions. So that seems like an interesting segue for our last transfer of this episode, which is Marcus Thuram, rumored to go to Liverpool potentially in the summer. Liverpool want to move on from Darwin Nunez. I think that's fairly clear. We were talking about that weeks after Slot arrived. It seemed
we liked him for Arsenal.
We did like him for Arsenal. I love him for Arsenal, but I also just want to see him play anywhere, because he's just he's just like chaos incarnate. So
he's part of the fun parts of the game, right? Like when we talk about football becoming like too systematized, like Darwin has no system about him. A bit like Nico Jackson actually feels like he overcomes some of the systemic ideas of things. Darwin is like the true entropic idea of Nico Jackson.
I love the guy. Arne Slot clearly thinks that he's too messy something.
He's too something.
Yeah, he's too something.
Too beautiful.
Marcus Thuram? like we were talking before we started recording about how much we love this guy. Like we've loved him since he was in France, since he was on a team getting relegated at Guingamp. He was one of the most effective attackers for a team that was genuinely garbage in every conceivable way. Went to Gladbach, had a pretty good time there, and now Inter has exploded this season. He's got 12 goals, 3 assists in under 1,400 minutes. He's overperforming XG, but his XG is still highly, respectable, very, very good. I like this player a lot. It would seem very un-Liverpool for them to sign a guy who's got 15 goal involvements from 9 XG, because you're paying for a better player than the one you're getting.
So looking at the transfer rumors today and this week, which is a thing that we've been doing. If you're not subscribed to the newsletter, thetransferflow.com is where you'll find it. We produce, in times of transfers, we produce basically daily roundups of the transfer rumors and often player analysis on a daily basis. We'll do that all throughout January. Looking at the rumors just this past week and kind of aggregating them, you start to see patterns there. And one of the patterns that you're seeing is that Arsenal, despite not having obvious needs for many of the players, are a potential destination for everybody. Liverpool's the same way. And Liverpool have a bunch of things going on. It looks like they're going to end up with 2-year extensions for both company, or not company. Oh my God. Virgil van Dijk and Mohamed Salah. And that's the number that we pegged it at. Like 3 years would have been uncomfortable. We were looking at like a 2-year plus one. So like they're smart and we're less smart, but at occasion we get things right. So that's like one of the first orders of business. The next order of business is figuring out like how they're shuffling the parts in and out for the future years for Arne Slot. And we know that they wanted a 6. Maybe Gravenberch like solve their 6 problems, but I'm not sure that that's the case. I think that they want backup. The nice part is Gravenberch gives them lots of optionality on how they go about this. And he's been possibly the most notable. I don't think he's been the best because Caicedo's been out of his mind, but he's been one of the best 3, I think, defensive midfielders in the league this year. So they've got optionality on that. They need to get rid of Darwin. And when they get rid of Darwin, they need some more depth in and around that attacking group, although it's very good and it's sort of uniquely deep. Luis Diaz, also his agent, is out there sort of agitating for a new deal on him, but he's 27. And you're like, not sure that that's going to happen. So it's a case of people tilting their heads again to the side, like how does this shape potentially fit here? And they're very happy to smush square pegs into round holes. Thuram, I think his career and his last name suggests that he has a long time, sort of sail into the sunset in Italy. And that's a great league for him. I think that he can succeed there for quite a long time, given his skill set, which is pretty robust. I don't see him coming to the Premier League at this point in his career at all. Like, not unless he came like at a discount on like a late career deal that went to like a Newcastle or a West Ham, and they were able to fill part of their needs with that. That's the shape of what I see with that. Now, weird things happen, and so, sometimes you don't know. Like maybe maybe his goal was to play in England before he retires, and he had to tick that box off. A bit like Zlatan, I feel like had that goal. Yeah, I don't see it as a Liverpool shaped player though. Like that doesn't work for me at all.
Yeah, I don't really. There are very few teams in the Premier League who I think play in a way that would maximize what Thuram is, because he's not really a winger. He's not a centre forward. He can do a little bit, like he's much, much bigger than a winger. He's more mobile than a lot of centre forwards, but I don't really think that there's an obvious place for him in a top level team in the league. He's also got a contract till 2028. And at that point, he's going to be 31, I think. So this feels like he's having a bumper season and his agent wants to get that deal re-upped now while he looks great. So I hope he gets paid, but I don't think he's getting paid at Liverpool.
No, I agree with that. I think that, speaking of players that sort of like came from Italy, somebody signed for reasons and then were a performance level that made us feel bad for them, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you see the Zirkzee beatings that happened over the festive period?
Yeah, man. But I just don't know what, like. Don't sign for Manchester United is like my advice there. It's like it sucks. It sucks here. I hope he goes back to Italy to just like a decent club. Like we don't love the player, but like we don't hate him either.
Didn't hate
And
him.
they're gonna have look. Manchester United have to move some people if they want to do any kind of squad rebuild. And because they're crap, and because they have built their squad really badly, and they've got loads of guys who are permanently crocked, they don't have that many people who have much value in the market. So
And
if
so
Zirkzee can go,
another way the analytics looks at it is like he was in a good position. Like getting into good positions has actual value. One of the problems that we've complained about is like him not having a lot of shots from good positions. So when you're there, it's like the Darwin thing, like in sort of miniature, in that like, oh yeah, Darwin misses a lot of big chances. Darwin gets a lot of big chances. In fact, Mohamed Salah gets a lot of big chances and misses them. The fact that you're getting a volume of big chances is the positive here, unless you're like really incompetent, which there's a massive amount of selection bias that says that guys who get into good spots and can't score get moved backwards. Like that happens all the time, and they don't end up as being like regular center forwards in sort of premier leagues. Like it just does not happen. They either get moved out of position or they play in lower leagues where people can sort of deal with that level of gentle incompetence. Yeah, I don't know. It's United need a lot, and people are not tolerant of this. And it feels weird for us to be saying this. Oh my God, like I keep defending like what's going on. But the thing was, like, we didn't expect anything of them. So like it's everybody else's expectations that is the problem here. It's gonna take years to dig out. Just expect it's gonna take years. It doesn't immediately make like Amarim incompetent. It means that like they have a squad that when he came there, we're like, there's all sorts of pieces that don't fit. That hasn't changed at all. They haven't even had a
yeah.
transfer window under it. So yeah, it's going to take a while. Dan Ashworth has left the building. Now everything there is basically Barada and Ineos, and we'll see what they're able to do with it.
And the next time that you and I speak on this podcast, they'll have just been to Anfield to play Liverpool, which I assume is going to go super, super well. Okay. Shall we go to the other end of the table then, just to wrap up this episode?
No,
Nottingham
we have to
Forest.
talk about a small club. Okay. Nottingham Forest, right? Sorry.
I want it to be really, really clear to everybody watching and listening that I did not say that.
It was a request that we got in the comments. Like, you guys are awesome, so thank you for all your compliments. We actually we keep them, and then we snuggle them at night. They keep us warm as it gets cold here in England. We also actually keep them because it's useful for us in the future when we do advertising things like, hey, this is how much people say they love us. We ignore all the people at Chelsea who are Chelsea fans that complain about our constant negative Chelsea bias. They're fourth in the table right now.
They'll support somebody else in a few years. I don't care about them. What are Chelsea fans going to do? There aren't any of them. But Forest, huge club.
Yeah.
3 in Europe, arguably.
Lots of European championships.
Top 3 in the Premier League as well. Chelsea obviously had a ropey Christmas. Forest are like the form team in the league. They've won 5 on the bounce. And it wasn't like a totally cakey run. They had United, Villa, Spurs. They went away to Brentford and away to Everton. And Brentford at home, no joke. Everton have been a problem for everybody recently. Chelsea, Arsenal, City. The simple question is, can Forest keep it up? Because Forest fans are loving it, and so they should. But it's prompting a lot of like gammony kind of like, oh, doesn't anybody want to win this league type bullshit.
Yeah. Can they keep it up is like a question that happens in your late 40s when you go out on dating too. I just want to say, like, I have lots of relations to that particular question. I'm good, by the way. Thanks. No, so Nottingham Forest defensively are, I think, the third best team in the league. Patrick's like, wow, can Rishi edit that? Like, how much are we cutting? That was a question that I had when I was young, and that is, I'm not Jewish, but you know, they wanted to know the question.
Oh my god.
So
Oh my god. Can we cut? Can we just end here? You can see if I lean back into the light from the window, you can see my soul leaving.
You're
my
hoping
body.
that it's into the light, but really we know that you're nothing but evil. Like you're like an evil fruit roll up. Just
Guys, it's the
with a bit
2nd of
hair.
January. It's the 2nd of January, Ted.
Start
Jesus.
as you mean to continue the year. That's how I feel.
All right. Can we maintain this level for the whole year? Can Forest maintain this level for the whole year?
Can you maintain the level? That was exactly, you brought it full circle. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right. Yes. So can Forest keep it up? The question is, defensively, probably the 3rd best team in the league so far this year. Really, really stout. Teams have had a hard time breaking them down the entire year. Fulham have been a little more variant, but like it's interesting how close their metrics look to each other, which I found like slightly surprising. Yeah, and the answer to the question is, can Forest keep it up? Is probably not. Like they're probably gonna have some issues with performance as it continues. And the issue in that is really the attacking side. Like they've had some goals at right times. They've been quite good off of set pieces as well, which is very valuable. And I think the other thing you see is like they're a little fragile, especially up front. So do they have the depth of squad in order to do this? Probably not. They've had a good injury run so far, but really it's about like if you want to finish in the Champions League positions, you have to get enough 3 points and fewer 1 points. And they've had the rub of the green so far, or the rub of luck, to allow them to get more wins than they probably deserve. So when I look at it, Chelsea are clearly a better team in performance-wise so far this year. They have a much deeper squad. Then the question is really who's finishing 4th. And the blessing for Forest is that they've got a 6-point gap on City if they should happen to come back from the dead, because they've not had a good performance in like 2 months.
No, even the Leicester one. I saw that and I was like, right, surely City have worked something out here. And then I looked at the stats and I was like, oh my God, like what are you doing shipping this much to Leicester?
And Leicester are the whipping boys, right? Like everybody like slaps Leicester around and puts like 3-4 expected goals on them, and wasn't that bad, thankfully. So the concern is like, yes, they have a nice big points gap. Are Newcastle United good enough to get there? Maybe. The big worry is Manchester City. Bournemouth are slightly better in performance metrics. The question is really like, do they have enough depth to do that, and can they get enough 3 points as well to make up the big gap? Because they're like 3 full wins behind, which is a big problem. But 19 games, I think they're better than a coin flip. So like to make the Champions League, like not to finish 2nd or 3rd, but to make the Champions League, I think that they're better than a coin flip right now. And it's really incredible, like that we're having this conversation. It feels like Leicester in a much more financially bumpy era where like teams are smarter and like they're right there.
When you say to make the Champions League, we're talking top 5 here, right? Assuming that there are 5 places. Because I wouldn't say better than a coin flip for top 4.
You think really with a 5-point lead?
I just think like 6 points on City is not that much. Like
we've seen City rip off like 17-win runs, right?
Yeah,
but we've never seen them do it from here.
But they're gonna spend some money. Chelsea, I think are done, and then you're like Newcastle are 5 back, and Newcastle, the last couple of months have been steaming. I mean, over the last,
it's all about the midfield, like Bruno and Tonali starting to click, and how kind of finally putting them in positions where they can. Like that's really what this is about. And they were squidgy when I saw them in person against Chelsea earlier in the year. Like I thought Chelsea actually quite dominated that game. They've been much more robust since that time, and it might even been the Arsenal game that really kind of kicked things off, like up at St. James's Park up there, or whatever we call it these days. Who even knows? So I don't have to pick one. Like we're like versus the field, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And 5th is probably 5th is more than reasonable, but I don't know. I'm waiting for City to do a thing, right? Like we're just kind of poking them with a stick now. Like do something. Until they do something, we'll see.
It'll be interesting though. how things change for Forest, if things do change for them in the back half of the campaign as well, because the style they play, the better they are, the better they're perceived as being, the harder it'll be to play this way, right?
Yes.
Like they have the second lowest possession in the league. And actually, when you look at the games in this run that they've won, except for the Villa game, obviously because it's Emery, like all the other teams were pressing really hard against them. Even Everton pressed pretty hard against them. And Forest love that. Like that's great for Forest.
Yeah, I think Force thing is basically if they can break down teams, via an early goal, via set piece, via a winger getting ahead, and Wood being in the right spot, like then they're able to play that anyway. And so keeping things at 0-0 and grinding out the first goal allows them to really kind of execute their plan. It'll be interesting to see how teams adjust to them in the second half. But I would also say the same thing about Fulham. Like Fulham playing pretty much the same style, mostly the same level of execution in some ways. And I think Forest have a better squad right now than Fulham do. So like we're able to see those teams have success. Emery's style is different, but it's still the style of almost counterpunch anti-hero type stuff where like we don't necessarily want the ball. We don't want to dominate anything. We want to challenge you to like make a mistake and then we'll pounce on it and then we'll be able to play like on the break and do stuff. So you can see success of that style in the Premier League even right now. People feel like we don't talk about the big teams enough sometimes. Like we have been talking all year about how much we love Bournemouth and how we thought that they were going to be pretty good, and they're right there as well. So if we took kind of the collection of 3-7 or right now, I don't think 3-8 is really competitive because I don't think Fulham's numbers are going to get there. But 3-7 right now, like pretty good teams. Forest is technically the worst metrics of that lot, but it's nice to have a 2-win head start on that challenge.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an exciting back half of the season. That segment started with us talking about whether Forest could keep it up, and it ended with, I don't know if you noticed this, but you talking about Wood getting in the right spot. So it feels like this was like a very kind of thematically coherent episode. Thank you very much for joining us for our first episode back after the holidays. Make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel if you're watching this on YouTube. Make sure that you drop us a 5-star review if you've enjoyed this and you're listening on your favorite podcast app. Obviously, sign up for the newsletter because I think this is going to be an unusually interesting January, and the newsletter will be a great place to be updated on it. And big things coming from the transfer flow this year, right, Ted?
Yes, slowly but surely, we're continuing to improve, and I hope that honestly, like it's been a really good run. We are exactly on schedule for when I launched this back in June of this past year of kind of what I had hoped for, like not even my expectations, but what I'd hoped for. And given that it seems like it's repeatable, that's all the things that we're looking for in sort of predicting performance. We have some, as mentioned before, there's been some people that have gotten in touch with me on the FPL idea. We're not going to do that until next season. So like it won't be a thing that will start until kind of like July time, but we're definitely evaluating people. So everybody that's been in touch, I will get back to you. I've just been trying to take a real holiday. Yeah, and people like got pretty excited about it as well because they look forward to the idea that we can do similar things with FPL that we've done with transfers and team analysis, and the numbers just keep going up, which is great.
Yeah. And we've got 2 podcasts and 5 newsletters to fill every week. So if you have things that you want us to cover, please do let us know. Send us any ridiculous transfer rumors and we'll be annoyingly practical about them.
Patrick looks forward to Wednesdays because it's less excruciating than trying to keep up with my horrible segues and tangents.
Why? Ravi's just a very polite, nice man.
He is. He's wonderful.
Is it so hard?
That was the whole Nottingham Forest question.
Is it so hard? Okay, right. We'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.